Mm-hmm.
All right. You're good.
All right. Well, good morning again on Monday mornings with Masterwall, with Grant and Brian. I am Brian.
I am Grant.
And I am glad to be back. I know last week, for those who maybe see this later on, we had a couple of glitches in kind of what did on. So we will end up getting Dennis Deppner back on. But today, I have looked forward to this one specifically for a long time since I talked to him first. Was Buck Buchanan. He is now currently the president and coach, author, speaker of Buchanan Consulting. He's been in the industry for a long, long time. You go to his LinkedIn page. I'm looking forward to hear some of the information as to where you came from and what you have done in the past, because there's only 2 jobs that are listed there up until now. So it was kind of an interesting thing. He does have a book out. We're going to get into a little bit of today. I wanted to make sure we publicize this. The Game of Sales. I think it's a phenomenal book. I was teaching actually at Lancaster Bible College, a class in sales negotiation for a little while. And this was one that I would have loved to be using in that class for sure. So with that said, Buck, welcome to the show. I'm going to stop sharing for now and just come to you and say thank you for joining us and welcome. And why don't you give us a history a little bit, where you came from, how you got into the industry, and kind of what your history is of within the industry of where you were.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I've watched a lot of these Monday morning presentations you had. I've been impressed with them. I think you guys are doing a great job with them. It's good for the industry. I think it's good for your customer base. So my hat's off to the Masterwall team for stepping up and doing something innovative.
I'm on mute. Whatever you guys want.
Okay. Keep going. Here I am. So anyway, Brian says, how long you been in the industry? You couldn't have done much less or earlier because you've been in the industry for so long. Well, actually, it's a quick, short story. When I was in college, I worked at a hardware store. I got out of a hardware store, it was in the 70s, and there were no jobs. A guy walked in one day, he worked for Greyhound, and he says, hey, you need a job? And I said, yeah, I need a job. So they hired me to go to work for Greyhound. So I was in the bus business for 4 years. I became a dispatcher. Greyhound was trying to hire people that got college degrees, and they were looking to build up their management team. So I went to work as a dispatcher, and within 4 years, I had 3 promotions. But I found out that if you really wanted to do anything in that business, you had to be part of the union, and you had to be there a long time. So I went and looked for something else. So I ran into this guy. He says, I need a sales guy. I said, well, okay, what do you sell? He said, well, it's building materials. Well, I worked in a hardware store for 3 years. He said, you're qualified. That was Stowe. So I actually went to work for Stowe, and in November of 1981, they'd only been in business for about 18 months before I went to work for them. I was the 13th employee hired at the time, and the first one that was hired outside of Rutland, Vermont. And so they said, will you come up to Vermont for a week, and we're going to train you how to sell this stuff. So I went up to Vermont for a week, and they gave me a book, and it was in German. They gave me another book. It was a 2-page flyer in English, and they gave me a color chart. They said, now study all this information, and we'll go make some sales calls tomorrow. So the next day I went out and rode with a salesman, and the first stop at 10 o'clock in the morning, we stopped at a gas station, picked up a 6-pack of beer. Well, that was pretty much the way I was trained for the next 3 days. And so one of the things that I decided to do is one of these days I'm going to write a book and tell people how they ought to train salespeople. So that's how I got to the book. But anyway, I stayed at Stowe for 15 years. I had a quick, when nobody else is in the company, you can get promoted pretty quickly. So there's only 13 people. So the chances of me getting to move up the ladder are pretty easy. So I started out as a sales guy in Atlanta. 9 months later, I became the regional sales guy in Atlanta. And at the end of 1981, I went to Germany on a training mission. And in that training mission, we spent 2 days of being educated in the products. And I was called up to the head guy's office. Sat in the head guy's office. He says, we got some news for you. He says, we're going to eliminate your boss, and we're going to give you his job as national sales manager. And so I've been with the company 9 months at this time, and he says, we don't really think you can do the job. We're going to give you 6 months to see if you can. So with that vote of confidence, I got on a plane, came back to the United States, and I told my wife, I says, well, dear, the good news is I got promoted. Oh, that's great. She says, bad news is I only got 6 months to work. So she says, you better get busy. Anyway, I stayed there for 15 years, and I helped build that company where it was when I left. And then I joined Parex in 1996 and stayed there for 21 years. And when I left there, I was a senior vice president. And for several years, I managed what they call the facade division, which was the Parex business in the companies that they acquired. And that's kind of how, over that time, I went through it. And I got involved in the industry with EMA, was the president of EMA 3 different times, and been involved basically since the beginning of EMA, and found out that to be a great way to help move the industry forward and also learn about the business, get to know the people in it. So that's kind of a quick rundown of how I got to where I am. So starting a bus business, ended up in the EIFS business. So.
Well, speaking of EMA, Buck, just your history and where we are now as an industry, and where you kind of see the industry going, because you're an outsider getting to kind of look in. And and what direction do you see the industry going?
Well, it's certainly a different view when you're on the outside because, I'm a neutral guy now. So people say, well, gee, maybe you can help us understand what's going on. Well, first of all, the EIFS industry has gone through lots of changes over the many years. I am in the process of writing a book about the EIFS industry, and the first guy I talked to was Frank Marcelli, and I've spoken to him a couple of times in the last 2 weeks, and he's 88 years old, and he's still talking about, he can remember a lot of the things that happened years ago. So it's been really interesting. But there's a case where a guy started with a vision and a work ethic and really built an industry. And there were a number of companies involved with it at the manufacturing level over time. When EMA started in 1980, 81, they had 8 or 9 members. There were probably, within the next 5 years, there were probably 15 to 20 companies that were manufacturing some form of EIFS products. And so what happens in most industries as they grow, their consolidation takes place. But there were a lot of things that we had to deal with as an industry, dealing with codes and fire. And you'd have to remember when Frank started the business, there was no building codes for EIFS. It wasn't up until 2010 or 11 that we actually became into the building code. So many years that we had to deal with code issues. So you had to deal with the code issues. Then you had to deal with the water intrusion issues in 1996. And all those things were roadblocks that were thrown in front of the EIFS industry. When the water intrusion issues came in 96, a lot of people forgotten, but 30% of our business in this industry was in the residential sector. You could go into towns of Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Nashville, and there were 50% of the neighborhoods would be built with EIFS homes. And that started back in Grant when your dad was working with Billy Joe Donaldson and those guys, and they kind of got that residential business up and going, and it was a boom. But when the water intrusion hit, that basically took the industry away. That sector of the industry was gone, and therefore we had to convert to the commercial sector, which we've been able to continue to grow and maintain since then. But now we've kind of stabilized the industry. We got through the recession of 2008. The industry has come back to life. Construction's come back to life. Of course, we got a little hiccup now with the COVID, which has affected all of us. But as far as the industry, you've really are at a point now, I think, for the next couple of years to see a real change, because there has been, with the consolidation of companies, you now have about 5 companies really involved in the business, Masterwall being one of those 5. Only one of the other 4 is privately owned, and the other 3 are owned by large corporations. When large corporations get involved in companies, or investment companies get involved in companies, the reason they do business is different. You guys, at Masterwall still have a passion. It's still a personal business. You're making decisions based on a lot of relationships. The other companies that are owned by the big companies or by the investment groups, they're really interested in one thing, and that's the bottom line. And you're going to see how that's going to impact the business over the next couple of years. And I think we'll see some things. I think it gives Masterwall a good opportunity to really go in and fill a void, because people like to deal with people, and they don't like to deal with accountants. So if you've got those personal relationships, I think that'll go a long way. If you care about customers and take care of them the way you used to, that's going to be a void in the market. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for you guys. I can hear you, Brian.
Brian, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know why that was interesting. Makes me think of, you said something about 2010, 2011 when things were there with the industry and it kind of coming out. Almost makes you think the industry in some respect when it comes to code and building officials and things that are out there is very young. I mean, it's been around a long time, so we know that it's been there, but yet at the same time, there is a young industry to kind of jump into those code pieces to say, yeah, we're here. And now we can even help even more because we are in the code. So I think that's kind of interesting dynamic, because you said 2010, 2011, when we finally got into code, to where architects and engineers and specifiers are going to really have some guidance to what does it need to be done, or, you know, what needs to get done to do these things right.
Yeah.
One of the things in your book, and I'm going to put this up on the screen, that I think was really, really awesome. I mean, there's core pieces to it, but one of the things that you had mentioned was kind of knowing your competitors. And the reason I loved this so much personally was because, like I've said a couple of times, I think on the show even, I've mentioned the fact of, you know, being on this show to me is like being in a sports arena. You're a competitor. You're going to fight like crazy to win and beat that other guy and get the championship. But at the same time, when you're off the field, you're pretty good friends. I mean, it's very rare you see anybody really hate each other off the field of competition. But on the field, you might have won this year, but next year I'm going to kick your butt and I'm going to win. And so in that sense, the knowing your competition piece, I know was an interesting thing in your book on as a sales guy. Can you speak a little bit to how you see that and how maybe you've seen it play out positively in the industry?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. Number one, the positive impact is you're going to get more done if you want to move the industry forward, if you can work together. So that's one key element. And the EIFS industry wouldn't be where it is today if the competition hadn't worked together. And early on, when EMA was formed, all the little guys got involved and Drive-It didn't join. But several years later, Drive-It did join. So it became a really an industry that could speak on behalf of the entire industry. That's really a benefit. But there's more to it from a sales guy's point of view. Knowing your competition is like understanding what your competition doing if you're playing baseball, football, or basketball. So, for example, one of the best quarterbacks that ever played the game in the NFL was Peyton Manning. Of course, I'm a Tennessee guy, but that's okay. But the point about him, he was a student of the game, and he would study the competition, whoever he was going to play, and he could anticipate what they were going to do. He knew when they lined up a certain way, how they would react to the plays. So he studied it. The same thing goes true even in our business today. Is your sales guys go out there, they need to know who they're competing with. If they're working with their distributor, what does your distributor have that the other guy doesn't have? What is the other distributor's strengths and weaknesses, and understand how you can offset those. So while you're competing in the marketplace, understand what your competition's doing and understand what you can do that can beat them. So match your skills with theirs and find out your strengths and their weaknesses, and then play to your strengths and offer their weaknesses.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And I want to keep going because I know we do have a hard stop for you, especially. I loved this one, the 5 keys of business functions, mainly because, especially as a sales guy. So here's my cynical side of being a sales guy. Don't make it about price. You read this everywhere. It's not about price. It's not about price, right? Grant's my boss.
That's right.
So we know we don't want to make it about price. We want the most that we can get. And yes, Steve Smithwick, we are getting the most margin we possibly can get. So we're going to do that for you. But But there are key other factors to this. And I thought, to me, it was like you really had it nailed when you kind of put this piece together to say, yes, price is part of it. Let's acknowledge that. But here are these other 4 key pieces to the sales part of what we're doing, correct?
Right. And what's important to understand is, and a lot of people make this mistake, you can have the lowest price, but doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the job.
Yeah.
And you're dependent as a sales guy. If you've got great relationships with that customer and the customer loves you and wants to do business with you, if you got a crummy product, you're in big trouble. If your service sucks, you're in big trouble. So you've got to do these other components to be successful. Now you can get by with not doing all 5 of them, but you need to at least do 3 of these if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
And price, as you say, Brian, is really the least important when you really get down to it. Because if you're delivering a good quality product and you have a brand recognition in the marketplace, so you're creating demand for it, and you're providing service, and you've got that relationship that your customers know they can depend on you, price becomes not even an issue on the board.
Yeah.
So it's really important, I think, when you look at it. Price is not the one thing, and there are a lot of things that make success, and all of us are dependent on other parts of our business to be successful.
Yeah. And that's what I loved about it. I'll get to you, Grant. You know, I loved about it was you had it in there, right? And a lot of places that are these books that I read, a lot of times they'll throw price out of the whole equation. And here you had it in there. It's just the balance of that. I don't know what you wanted to ask, Grant.
No, I was going to say, obviously, and I would think Buck would agree, the level of quality, the level of service you're able to offer, and the investment in marketing you make is going to affect the price that you can offer in the market. And all those things should add value to your product, or hopefully your price can be maybe a little above the competition because of the value you're adding to those other components.
Yeah. Yeah. The value proposition is a key element in a business philosophy. And if you're doing those things, if you're creating demand, people want to buy it. Why do people want to buy a Lexus? Because it's got a great reputation. It's a high performance car. That's why they can get more for it. Yeah. So the same thing with in service and construction products. Yes, you can get a better number for your goods if you're doing these other things correctly.
Yeah. The other one too, and you had mentioned this one specifically, is having a plan. And I think this is one of the hardest things for most sales guys. I think personally, even within the salespeople that I know in other industry specifics, I think in the EIFS industry is even harder just because it seems like there's more urgency that we have when people need things. They call, they need it now. Than other industries that are out there. But talk a little bit about the plan as you see it when it comes to the sales side of stuff.
Well, it's sales, it's meetings, it's anything you do. When you sit down with people, you need to have some kind of plan as to what you want to accomplish during that time period. And so many times I rode with sales guys and we're going to make a call on old Fred. Well, old Fred's a good old architect. We're just going to drop by and say, what are we going to do when we get there? Well, I hadn't seen Fred in a while. Well, are we going to drop off a binder? Are we work on a specification? Does he have some jobs coming up? But you need to have a plan as you go into a call, have an agenda as to what you want to do, what's the purpose, what do you want to gain out of it, and what's the goal you want to get. The goal may be you got an order. The goal may be you got a meeting set up for the next time. The goal may be you got a specification. The goal may be that you invited them to a lunch. You got some kind of reason for going, but have an agenda with a plan of what you want to accomplish. And you really ought to do it. A sales guy should do this on Monday morning or Sunday night. Plan out what they want to do for the week and then break it down in smaller parts as they get ready for the call. But have something you want to do when you go in and make that call. Thought through before you just walk in the door and say, hey, here I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than chasing fires.
So everything can't be a 911 is what you're saying.
That's right.
That's right. Absolutely. Everything can't be 911. Hey, if there's questions out there, please raise your hand or comment in the comment section as we kind of go through these, because we do want to make sure that we get Buck off here for his next thing. But 3 keys of a product rep that you had put up there. And again, for me, the follow-up piece of it is one of the critical pieces. What do you see when it comes to follow-up in these 3 pieces?
Well, if I analyze if riding with sales guys all my career and talking to salespeople, these are the 3 things that I've identified. If you do those things right, you'll be successful. Number one is listen. You got to listen to what the customer says. Too many times sales guys want to listen to themselves talk, or they get their 25 slide presentation going. They got to get through 25 of them.
Yeah.
If you sold the job at slide 10, stop. But listen to what the customer needs are.
That's good.
And listen to what, if you're a manager, what your employees are telling you. Listen. So that's one thing. The second thing is keep a promise. How many times do sales guys leave a guy's office, say, I'll give you a call Monday, or I'll follow back with you next week, or I'll send you a sample, or I'll get that binder to you. And how many times that happens? A lot of times it doesn't. But, so if you tell somebody you're going to do something, make sure you do it. And then the follow-up, again, I've seen this happen too many times. A sales guy goes in and makes a great call on an architect, says, I'll follow up with you in a couple of weeks, never follows up. So you've taken all that goodwill that you built up in that initial call, and you forget to follow up. That's all gone out the window. So follow up is always a key element as to what you do in your sales process. Yeah. Don't assume they're going to call you. Don't assume they're going to send you an email. Follow up with them. Take the initiative to follow up with that person to keep them on the hook, and that goodwill that you built during that initial call, make sure you cash in on that.
Mm-hmm. No, this is great. This is great stuff. Now, I know we're going to let you go here in a minute, so I want to stop the video here of Sharon.
Brian, hold on real quick.
Yep.
So, Buck, I have your book here. So I had a question somebody had asked. I won't name a name since they asked a private question, but it's the game of sales.
Yep.
What B2B sales reps can learn from champion athletes about winning. So there's the book. I'm going to get it on the screen there. So if you have any questions, and I don't know, Buck, if you want to tell them where they can get the book if they want to.
You can get the book. I've got a website. It's booksbybuck.com. You can go on there. I'll ship it to you. I'll even sign it for you. But if you don't want a signed copy, you can go on Amazon. You can get it there, and it's available in that paperback as well as on Kindle version. So anyway, it's available. And it's written just based on my experience in sales, and it's kind of bullet points, and I hope you find it useful.
There you go. There's the slide right there. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I want to make sure I get that on. No, hey, this has been great. I mean, it is definitely one of those things. I think anybody should be reading the book, get in touch with Buck for sure. I mean, it's the wealth of knowledge of the industry. And like we said in the beginning, where things are going. Brad had a question real quick. I don't know if you have time, but you've been in many of the same trenches over the last 30 years in this industry. And my question for you is this: what is one of the funniest stories while making calls with a rep? I will say it was interesting. You mentioned the beer thing in the beginning. That's not in the book. So I was kind of wondering, maybe there's a separate book that I need to get when it comes to that one. But what's one of the funniest things maybe that you have seen?
Well, there's a long list of them, but I'll give you one quick one. We were, in the early days when you went and made calls on architects, they always said, well, you can stick a pencil through this stuff. Well, and then we had the high impact mesh, the Panzer mesh, the Armor mesh, whatever you called it. And so one of the key things you did is when you went to make a call on an architect is you took your hammer out and you hit as hard as you could the sample, and it wouldn't go through, it bounced off. So I was with these two guys in Michigan, and they were making a call on an architect. And so they were, hey, we got to really show you. These guys are young, just full of energy kind of guys. So the deal was one of them took it out and held it. Then they put it on the floor, and the other guy put his foot on it while the other guy swung the hammer to make a dent in the sample. So you guessed it, lo and behold, he missed the sample, hit the guy's toe.
Oh.
Hit the guy's toe at full swing. And the guy stood ramrod straight and didn't crack a smile, didn't yell or anything. So anyway, the architect says, man, I'm impressed with the sample, but I'm more impressed with this guy's tolerance for pain. He says, oh, it's nothing to it. We do this all the time. It's just a show. So we get out in the car. First thing he does is yells and screams, takes his shoe off, and he's got a blue toe. So anyway, that was one of the funny things.
I would have passed out.
You just had to be there to see that one.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Buck, I know you got to run. We thank you so much for doing this and look forward to many, many years. Your next book also is going to be coming out. I know you're working on that, so I definitely look forward to reading that one and hearing more. So,
and Buck, let me just say, for Steve respects the heck out of you. I don't know if he's on here listening today, but he appreciates y'all's relationship and the insight you're able to offer to him and those around him in the industry. So thank you for your relationship and your willingness to always be open and helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad to do it, and Steve's a good friend, and he was a competitor, and we became good friends doing that. So I've always enjoyed being around you guys, and again, I wasn't kidding when I was saying I think you guys are building the right team. You're going to have great success if you keep doing what you're doing because there's going to be opportunities for you.
I appreciate that. No,
best of luck to you. I'm sorry that I've got to run, but I'm actually going to I've got to speak to the Rotary Club in 2 minutes. So anyway, you all take care. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Absolutely. Have a great day.
See you guys.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. I know Buck is going to get out of here, but we will hang out and talk a little bit if everybody wants to and just talk about that and anything else, any other topics or any questions you might have for Masterwall even specifically. Grant and I will stay on here and kind of go through this, but I think that was awesome, Grant. Just again, I think the book, and I would love having him back to be able to kind of the next book here in the history of EIFS. Like I said, I just think it's interesting. He said 2010, getting into the code and being able to see it really in some respect. Again, this is respect to me being young in the industry myself, but it's a younger industry when it comes to now all of these regulations that we have.
You know what would be a really cool conversation would be Buck, Steve, Dave Boyven, Mike Murphy, have that whole crew on here together and just let them talk through the EIFS industry and what they've
Oh my goodness.
There'd be so much wisdom that could be shared from that group. Now that they're, obviously Steve's still president here, but now that they're all kind of, outside of the industry looking in, I think that'd be a great conversation.
Oh,
well, I will stop the recording, I guess, Brian. But
yeah, go ahead. You can stop it there. Thanks again. We'll see you everybody again next week.
Yep.